reading in this order actually was a hindrance, not a help for once. Hey y'all, it's Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing my Star Wars Canon project episode 4.5-ish. Alright, so before we get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments, what is your favorite Star Wars book? Do you read a lot of Star Wars books? Are you interested in Star Wars books? Let's talk about it in the comments. As I said in the intro, this is like 4.5 technically, which is actually me backtracking, because I have been working on the Star Wars Canon project long enough that I actually caught up on the High Republic section, meaning I had to put a pause and wait for the next few books to come out so that I could, you know, make another episode. But in the meantime, I went ahead and continued forward with my project, reading books that are set more around the time of the films, which is about 100 years in the future. But officially, the next 4 books in the High Republic section had been released, and so I wanted to backtrack so that I can read them and officially close out this phase. So this section of the High Republic has been really focusing on the Jedi battling against these Nihil, which initially start out as like space pirates / Vikings, but have now turned into these very violent colonizers that are trying to take over a section of space and also destroy the Jedi, destroy the Republic that is trying to expand. It's caused a lot of problems. So now we are nearing the end of this section, so we've been fighting these guys for a good long time. And to start out the close is Tears of the Nameless by George Mann. So this is the next of the young adult books, once again following 𝗖cie, a Jedi character that I greatly enjoy. He's a giant nerd. He wants to be a historian, but of course, being a Jedi, you have to occasionally do adventures and things like that. But he has really dedicated himself to trying to figure out how to defeat this blight, which is this spreading disease that eats everything in its path. Along the way, Wreath enlists the help of Padawan Amadeo, which it's so wild to see, like, Wreath has grown from being a Padawan himself to now like having a Padawan work under him. That's crazy. I love that for him. At the same time, though, he is also working with Sith Aslan Rel, and of course, that's not sitting so well with a lot of the Jedi. But he may hold the answer to officially defeating these Nameless and taking care of the Blight. And while I am excited to continue on with that, I am even more excited to read Tempest Breaker by Cavan Scott, because this is going to be returning to the character of Lorna D, one of my all-time favorites of this section. She actually was a member of the Nihil, but has since left, and unfortunately for her, has to work alongside the Jedi to try and bring the Nihil down in order to secure her own freedom. Lorna is such a fun character. She is always out for her own survival. She is nefarious and clever, and seeing her interact with some of these Jedi characters, namely Avar Kriss, who is on the cover. Yeah, I cannot wait to see that, because Avar is like the golden child Jedi, and watching her interact with Lorna is going to be a lot of fun. This one is also an audio drama, which means, of course, I am going to be listening to the audiobook of it, because these are always phenomenally produced and have a full cast of characters. Highly recommend them every single time. Then these next 2 are technically like the same timeline, but it, like, you could read one or the other first, it doesn't really matter. But I think I'm gonna go with Trials of the Jedi by Soule first, which will officially be closing out the adult section of the High Republic. It looks like whatever happens in Tears of the Nameless, Wreath ends up finding an answer, and the Jedi are now officially trying to solve this problem of the Blight, take care of the Nameless, and also officially defeat the Eye of the Nihil, Marchion Ro. From looking at the summary, we are going to be returning to numerous characters we've seen thus far: Elzar, Avar, Porter, Bell, Buryaga, and Wreath as well, which is going to be really fun to see him in one of the adult novels instead of the YA ones. I'm excited, but also a little apprehensive, because I didn't love Charles Soule's writing style when I started this series. That was also the start of the series. By this point, I've grown to care a lot about these characters, so I'm hoping maybe it'll go a little bit better for me here. So then this last one is, of course, closing out the series for the YA section, and that is Into the Light by Claudia Gray. And honestly, the synopsis really gives you nothing apart from the fact that you're following a collection of Jedi who are trying to officially bring down the Nihil. So basically the same thing as the adult one, just possibly following different characters. One way or another, I am excited to officially close out this section. So on that note, I will talk to y'all again when I have started into Tears of the Nameless. .
Hey y'all, so I have hit the halfway point in 2 tiers of the Nameless. The Nameless are these beasts that actually are utilized by the leader of the Nihil to destroy Jedi, because these Nameless actually feed on the Force. And I really like actually that with this one we're getting a lot of acknowledgments to the novels from 100 years in the past. The other, I think that was like phase 2 of the High Republic, where we saw some of the basis that's set up for this Nihil group for Marchion Row, and it feels very much like I'm in the know by having that knowledge. Along with it though, I'm also really interested in the fact that we're getting some exploration around like more ancient civilizations of the Star Wars universe by Wreath investigating these Nameless, as well as this blight, this plague like thing that's infesting worlds and is slowly growing. Also with Wreath, we are seeing him utilizing the knowledge of a Sith and how it's kind of, I won't say corrupting Wreath, it is leading to some temptation, which kind of is tying into like the religious overtures that you can see in how the Jedi practice their beliefs and their relationship with the Force and all. But seeing as how I love seeing the Jedi struggling with their beliefs in the Force, and how Wreath is desperate for this knowledge, but at the same time, like, he doesn't want to go about receiving it in the same way that the Sith did. It's just making Wreath an all the more interesting character to follow in this story. Tying into one of my biggest cons so far, it feels like we have too many perspectives going on here, which is funny to say because I think the adult novels have far more perspectives, but this one, each of them don't feel like they're really getting enough time for their point in the story to be well established. Like, I don't quite understand yet why we're following some of these perspectives. We have Wreath, we have Padawan that is working with him, whose name is totally gonna escape me. We have Comac, who is actually Wreath's prior master, and then we actually have some like flashback chapters to see when Comac was a Padawan, and something he struggled with as a Padawan is very much tying into something he's struggling with now as an adult, and that's another thing I do like. I think it parallels very well with Wreath's chapters too. Then we have some for Vernestra, and again, like, I don't really think Vernestra's chapters are very necessary right now, honestly. I think it kind of is giving us time to see what's going on in the universe on the whole and how the Jedi are fighting against Marchion Row and the Nihil right now, but I don't know if it's really necessary. Even though I do like Vernestra, it doesn't feel like her perspective so far has really added much to the story in this book. And kind of the same thing for the Padawan. I assume it's setting up something because this Padawan character is going to be more important moving forward, but right now, like, he doesn't feel super needed. All in all though, I am enjoying this one. George Mann's writing style is just pretty addictive overall. I do feel like having some of the extra perspectives is making this book feel a little bit overwritten, a little bit too drawn out. But I don't know, I'm also only at the halfway point. It's very possible that the importance of their perspectives is going to hit in the latter half of this book. We'll find out.
Hey y'all, so I officially finished out Tears of the Nameless, and I feel like this did make a lot more sense as to, you know, everything that was going on in the story for the universe by the end of the book than I did at the halfway point. I also did feel like certain characters and their perspectives were actually more needed than I felt like they were in the first half as well. I also realized in my prior update, I didn't mention Affy, which was another character that I was curious as to why we were seeing from her perspective. I think the problem comes down to this book feels very separate in that part of the storyline is very focused on the battle with the Nihil, like really in the thick of things. And then the other part of it is really focused on like the higher trying to figure out what's going on and how to stop them strategizing. So the author was doing their best to bring these two together by having some of these perspectives and their roles in each of those shifting throughout the story. That did become a lot more apparent in the latter half of the book, and I think that really did kind of save this for me. But really, my favorite thing about this book overall was very much Wreath and the character exploration around him. Vernestra's character actually did become a lot more important when connecting to Wreath's storyline as well, and I really enjoyed that because it allowed us to see how even though the Jedi are supposed to limit their relationships and not have too deep of connections, like, they still can form these relationships, and I really liked that. I do see why we had the 30-year flashbacks with Comac's perspectives, because as I said, you kind of see him learning a lesson as a Padawan and having to relearn that lesson as an adult. But honestly, by the end of the book, I think we probably could have done without those. And then as far as the battle against the Nihil goes in this, the main villain character we're following, he seemed more like a villain of the week sort of character as opposed to someone who has been established in the Nihil. Maybe he was presented in a prior book, but I have no memory of that. As for the Nameless though, I did really like the reveals with them, and I'm very curious to see like where is that going to go, because it had some elements that really did pull from the phase 2 of the High Republic, which is the 100 years in the past. All in all, I did like this book. I think it did continue on the story of the overarching universe. I do feel like it was a bit overwritten and nothing in it was so impactful, so shocking, that made it really stand out from some of the other novels. So my rating for this came out to like 3.75 stars. And actually kind of going back to that, there was this one shocking thing that happens that I think would have had a lot more impact if we hadn't seen this exact event take place in numerous books previously at this point. I don't know if it's the fact that like different authors are writing these books, so they all come to the conclusion of utilizing this twist separately, or if Disney is like pushing them to keep doing this to maintain these higher stakes. But by this point now, I've read this so many times that I'm literally just starting to expect it to happen. Really impacted one specific character. I feel like if that twist was not utilized, then this character would have really been insignificant and their entire perspective could have been tossed out. It feels like it was just slid in there to expand the book, to fill more pages. There were some solid moments in it, but this one was not a favorite. Hello my friends. So I've officially finished out Tempest Breaker by Cavan Scott, and I didn't talk to y'all before because this is like a 6-hour audiobook and it just seemed like it would be a little silly. But this is another audio drama and it is once again amazing. It is so well produced. All of the voice actors do a phenomenal job. I felt so settled into the story and I love following Lorna. She is such an interesting character. We've really gone on such a ride with her throughout this series so far. She has officially cleared her name that she is not the head of the Nihil, but she is still very well known as a pirate, somebody who is willing to stab you in the back in order to ensure her own survival. The book is that setup is about a reporter actually going to get the story from Lorna after the fact. Has it so that the book is broken down into different parts, telling the section that happened at this point and then telling this section that happened at this point. There's not these like transitionary moments between the big events that are going on, meaning there's a lot of action. It is pretty freaking fast paced. And we do actually get to see a little bit more of Lorna's interactions with some of the Nihil characters, a bit more about how she has changed since everything's gone down with the Nihil and the fall of Starlight Beacon, which I of course loved that. She does come across like she's a bit more empathetic towards other people, is finally starting to realize the real effect living how she has and doing what she's done with the Nihil is having on grand scheme of the universe and the Republic and all of these people. I especially enjoyed seeing her interactions with some of the Jedi characters because of course she is a Nihil. She is a villain to them, but some of them have kind of come to accept her for who she is, but know they can utilize her when necessary, while there are others who, of course, do not trust her in any way, shape, or form, but are being forced to work with her, namely IV.5, who is a character that I've always had some complicated feelings for. I don't know, she just comes across like the golden child to me and is kind of boring, honestly. The one major issue she has had as a Jedi is in her romance with Elzar. But here, we actually get to see Avar from such a different perspective because these two don't like each other. They butt heads from the get-go, seeing as how Avar has tried to take Lorna out a time or two. So for once, we're seeing Avar in a much darker light, where she is more willing to push the envelope, also made it so that there was this great fun tension between the two of them. Speaking of tension though, one of my other favorite parts of this was any interactions we had between Lorna and Marcion. Also really fun. I do feel like timeline wise, this one is a little wonky because it kind of actually probably could go before Tears of the Nameless, but I read it afterwards. And there are certain events in this one that feel like we see the after effects in Tears of the Nameless, but there's also things in Tears of the Nameless that we see play out in this one. So these two are kind of taking place around the same time period, so I guess just reading timeline wise, putting that out there. And along with that, something similar to Tears of the Nameless with this one is that there is also a lot of stuff that is callbacks to the prior phase from 100 years in the past with the Path of the Open Hand. And I thought that was a lot of fun once it clicked in my brain. We've seen this character before. We've heard this rhetoric before. And it sounded just as wild then as it does now, but now they have some serious firepower to back it up. I loved how this book closed out. It had some fun twists, it had some fun turns, and there was a really satisfying ending too. I love Lorna. I think she's such an interesting and amusing character to follow. I love this book as a goodbye to her, but at the same time, I love this book as a starting point for her. I would adore if we got more of this character, a little mini series following her. That would be so much fun. I finished this one out and I would have to say it's probably about a 4.5 stars. I feel like there were maybe a few things I can nitpick with this here and there in the plot that just either felt like conveniences or I think needed a bit more fleshing out, but all in all, I really, really did enjoy this. I blasted through this audiobook. It was so good.
Hey y'all, so I have hit the halfway point into Trials of the Jedi. I do think the fact that I have more of an attachment to the characters by this point definitely helps. I still don't love how prevalent Avar and Elzar are in this series overall. I just don't think the romance between them is very interesting. On the whole, I don't think Avar is really very interesting. That said, though, we are seeing a lot of characters I do appreciate, like Bell and Buryaga, who were previously Padawans and at this point are now young knights. We've got Reith, who actually is more prevalent in the YA novels, but he is present here along with Aslan Rel, who was a Sith. And then we actually are getting to see more of Yorick, I believe is her name, and she's like this bounty hunter who actually has the Force and ended up leaving the Jedi Order when she was I don't think if it was a youngling or a Padawan, probably a Padawan. Unfortunately, we're not really seeing much of her interacting with Elzar, which was the thing that I really enjoyed in the prior book we saw her in, because I felt like they had some really great banter, this really interesting dynamic, seeing as how they both push against the Jedi beliefs, and obviously she pushed so far as to leave, whereas Elzar has not. And so I really enjoyed that, and I'm sad we haven't really seen any more of it. But we've also had a few other characters here and there, and of course we're seeing different areas of the universe at this point in order to see the numerous different ways the Nihil are affecting this section of space, what is going on in this larger war that's happening. I will say this one also felt more like the Marchion row I've been wanting, because the past few books in this section, I didn't feel like Marchion was really living up to the villainous character that had been created in some of the earlier books, where he was this cult leader who really believed everything he was selling. There for a while, it just felt like he was kind of a very typical, power hungry dude. And I really like seeing the little tiebacks to phase 2, where we met his ancestor and also saw some of these different creatures and ideas that have continued on into the story. So I really like that connection. As far as the overarching plot, we were setting up one thing and I thought like, oh, this is super interesting. We finally figured out how we're gonna take care of the Nameless, how we're gonna handle the Blight. And like right at the halfway point, all of that took a major turn. I'll say that. Part of me is a little frustrated because it feels like we just wasted all of this setup we watched. But that might not quite be what happens. I don't know. It does have me also very intrigued to see like what is Soule going to have happen next, because this is supposed to be the end of this little section of the High Republic. You can't do another fake out. This is the last book in this series. You have to close this story out. I thought we were setting that up, but again, we took a major twist and not so much anymore. So I'm, like I said, I'm really interested to see what's gonna happen. Where are we gonna go from here? I have no clue, but I'm intrigued enough to keep on reading.
Hey y'all, so I have officially finished out Trials of the Jedi, meaning I have finished this High Republic section, at least when it comes to the adult novels. Okay, overall, I do think this is a satisfying ending to this series. Soule did manage to wrap up certain character storylines in a satisfying way. That said, said. I kind of had the same issue with this one that I did with the first book in this series by Soule, which is I just feel like he gives too large of an ensemble cast. And that's really saying something because pretty much all of these Star Wars novels have so many character perspectives. The plotline that is going on around this planet that is actually supposed to be in the occlusion zone under the control of the Nihil, and on that planet there are some Republic fighters who end up basically staging a revolution. That storyline was interesting, but it felt so separate from the story going on with the Jedi trying to finally take down Marchion Ro and this blight. It felt like two completely separate stories, and I feel like having them in the same book really did both stories a disservice. At the same time, we also have this plot around Porter, his battle against General Viste, who was responsible for the passing of his sister. We finally see the closeout of that, and while I did really enjoy that because I've always really enjoyed Porter's character, again, it just felt so outside of what the rest of the story was really focused on. At the end of his storyline in particular, I almost felt like that storyline should have closed out in a short story perhaps. And then in all of the like intermissions between the chapters, we follow some civilians who are on a planet that is being overtaken by the blight. So again, that's like 4 very separated storylines. And at the very least, the one with the civilians makes a little bit more sense with the Jedis because they're trying to stop the blight. The rest of them, I don't know, it just felt too disconnected. It felt too disjointed. And another big problem that comes about for me because of that situation is that certain moments or certain character scenes really had to be compressed or cut down because there's so much else going on in the book. There was a certain fight that I really was gearing for. I was so ready, and yet it took forever for us to finally actually watch that play out. It was like we kept getting distracted by all of these other events that side characters were dealing with. Then we finally make our way back to this fight, and it actually resolves rather quickly and a little bit disappointingly. I really wanted a dramatic conclusion with that scene in particular, but because we were so focused on everything else, like I just didn't feel like that ended in a satisfying way. I do think how Soule gave us the answer to the blight and how the plot around it officially closed out made sense. Like I understood how we got there, but the impact of how they solved this problem didn't really matter that much to me because I didn't care very much for the characters that are most directly involved in the solution. And I'm trying so hard to be not spoilery about this, but like it didn't have the same emotional impact because I don't really care for these characters in the first place. And then because those scenes felt rather rushed. Things I did love about this, there's actually a chapter from Ember, the Charhound's perspective. That chapter also made me very nervous. I love the relationship between Belle and Buryaga. I really enjoyed seeing the growth we've seen of Wreath. I also felt like, and this is kind of funny to say, at the conclusion, there wasn't enough bloodshed. For the number of characters who have perished leading up to this solution, I really thought we were gonna have a lot more not returning at the end of this book. And I'm not necessarily complaining about that. I just a little shocked that things came about so easy. Again, I just wish this book stayed the same size, but really focused purely on the 9 Jedi characters who are trying to take care of this Nameless and Blight situation. I am very intrigued to see the events that go on around like the B team because that had Vernestra, who has been kind of on the sidelines in a lot of the adult novels, but she is pretty prevalent in the YA books, so I imagine maybe she is going to be involved there, and possibly the YA books will be focused on the B team of Jedi, and that does have me very intrigued to finish out the YA series. I did like this. I feel like it could have closed out in a way that I would have really loved if there had been some reworking around it. I just don't think Soule's writing style is really for me. So in the end, this is probably like a 3.75 stars for me. I'm gonna go ahead and say 4 stars for my graphic, but it was satisfying enough of an ending. I just didn't really love it, unfortunately. Good morning, y'all. So I have just slightly surpassed the halfway point of Into the Light by Claudia Gray, and first and foremost, I want to say that this is listed as the final book of the High Republic, including the adult one on Yoda's datapad, and honestly, thus far, I would actually say a majority of the events take place before Trials of the Jedi. Like, it feels like a lot of the events we're watching are going to lead up
to what they are doing in Trials of the Jedi. I was really thinking after reading that book that this was going to be focusing on like the B team. We're planning to try and take care of this Nameless situation as well as the Blight. But instead, right now, it really does feel like we are watching these characters continue to make this connection between the Nameless and the Blight, which I don't really understand why. I feel like we had figured everything out we needed to in Tears of the Nameless by that point. Why is this what we're continuing on with? And along with that, I don't really know if I would say there were certain characters that feel like they're main characters in this one. Probably say Wreath is the most integral Jedi character. We do also have Burryaga, which is a little strange because Burry has mostly been seen in the adult novels, and I feel like this is, I don't think it's the first time he's been used in the YA, but it's the first time he's been used so much in the YA. Then we do have numerous other characters that we've been introduced to earlier on in the YA novels, including Nan, who works for the Nihil. We've got Avon Staros, who her mother works for the Nihil and she works for the Republic. There's Dr. Macampa, who also works for the Nihil, but kind of like for her own side. And then we are seeing a little bit more of the Drengir, which I do like that because the Drengir are an interesting villain and I feel like they really have been the main focus of the YA novels. But because this is also focusing on the Nameless and the Blight, it sort of feels like it's a little too split. We have two main antagonists we're going after at this point. I'm just worried that like neither of them are really going to be resolved in a satisfying way because again, majority of the events thus far feel like they actually take place before Trials of the Jedi. So I think reading in this order actually was a hindrance, not a help for once. I'm also just not as invested in the characters as I want to be. I mean, I love Wreath. I'm so here for Wreath. I will be every single time. All the other characters, this one not going super hot. I really do think it comes down to the order in which I read those books. If I had read them in the opposite order, I don't think I would be having the same issue, honestly. Apart from that, I mean, I am still invested enough in the story. I am curious to see. There's one character that might be a turncoat, but at the same time, like, we're not really sure. So I am intrigued about that element. And then how are things going to wrap up with the Drengir? That is probably the most interesting element that is keeping me the most invested so far. So I wanted to go ahead and film this update because I'm planning to try and finish out this book today because honestly, it does read really fast. Like these YA Star Wars novels do read really quickly, which is great.
Hey y'all, so I officially finished out the Star Wars High Republic by finishing this last book, Into the Light. And honestly, I think I actually messed up by doing the young adult book last, but that is what Yoda's datapad told me to do. That is the timeline order I've been following. This should not be the final book you read. You should read Trials of the Jedi last. Even as far as a end for the YA section, it's a bit of a letdown as far as endings go because you don't really see an ending for the Nihil. You don't get to see the actual conclusion to the Jedi's battle against the Nihil. Rather, I would say this really wraps up the plot around the Drengir, these sentient plant-like species that have been kind of hanging out in the background of the YA stories. But really, again, the focus is always back to the Nihil. You don't get any of that here. You don't actually see any of that story close out. This one was a letdown, if I'm being completely honest. It's also surprising to me that it didn't feel like we really had main characters, even though I wouldn't say there were more character perspectives in this one than there have been in prior books. It just felt like the time dedicated to the characters wasn't really expanding upon them. Like it was very, very plot focused in this. And though, yeah, there's some exciting stuff that happens, the events did keep me engaged. If I was only reading these young adult books and I was really attached to some of these characters, I would not have been satisfied by the ending we see for these characters. There are two characters who do feel like their stories officially close out here, but neither of those characters are Jedi. Again, because this isn't really the end of their battle against the Nihil, it doesn't feel like they have a satisfying ending either. It very clearly seems like there's more to their story. There's more that is going to happen for them. My overall feeling at the end of this book was just unsatisfied. I was very unsatisfied. Wreath has been my go-to favorite character for all of the young adult novels. How this ends here, it's literally nothing for him. Thank God I read Trials of the Jedi already, so I know he has a bit more of a satisfying ending there. Another character does make a comeback here, and if I'm being completely honest, I actually sort of forgot who he was, because he appears in like one of the earliest YA High Republic novels, and then we haven't seen him again since. And I didn't feel like there was enough expansion on his character to kind of understand what he went through in the time between his appearances. Then there's this other character, Amadeo, who we did see in Tears of the Nameless, that honestly I don't feel strongly about him in any way, shape, or form. I felt like his use in that book was really more in order for a certain plot point to occur. So I had no attachment to him there, and therefore I had no attachment to him here either. I did enjoy getting to see more of the Wookiees' homeworld and learning a little bit more about their planet, their species, but besides that, like, I don't really feel like a lot happened in this book. Like I said, there's excitement around the plot against the Drengir, but even then it doesn't feel quite as comparable in stakes to that of the battle against the Nihil. And also how the story wraps up, I don't want to say it's a deus ex machina because it's not quite that, but it just feels very convenient and really easy. This was like a 3-star, and I'm not gonna lie, this is a really sad note to end on for the High Republic novels. If you're reading these, like I said, highly recommend do this one first and then Trials of the Jedi. That feels like a more official ending. This does not seem like an ending. And it's really weird to me because I've enjoyed a lot of Claudia Gray's prior Star Wars novels, but like this one did not stick the landing. So that's sad. And on that note, sadly, that is it for today, y'all. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, let's leave some sort of a plant emoji for the Drengir. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!